This is just the beginning.
The humid air of the swamp did not move. It hovered over the black water like a shroud of warm iron. Deep within the tracking canals of the Louisiana Marsh, 4 unmarked white NOPD vans drifted through the dense fog, their engines muffled to a low rhythmic hum. Leo Moretti stood on the bow of the lead flatboat, his immaculate linen trousers now marred by the dark, wet rot of the marshland. Beside him stood Captain Raymond Vance, his uniform jacket unbuttoned to expose a black leather shoulder holster containing a standard-issue automatic pistol. The tracking dogs lost the scent near the old Stilt shack, Leo, Vance said, his cold eyes scanning the weeping cypresses through a pair of military-grade night vision goggles. If she's deep in the interior, the swamp will swallow her before my boys can secure the ledger. Leo smiled a thin, venomous smile, his sharp features tightening as he pulled a fresh magazine from his vest pocket. She isn't going to let herself drown, Raymond. She's a St. James. She's waiting for us to make a structural error. Inside the rotting timber framework of the fishing shack, the single oil lantern burned low, casting a long geometric shadow of Evangeline across the gold-embossed pages of the registry. Her long, slender mahogany fingers were steady now, the internal fractures of her youth fully calcified into an armor of absolute tactical resolve. Trixie stood behind her canary yellow robe stained with Treme soot, her towering lacquered updo defying the gravity of their collapse. Grady's boat runners just radioed from the industrial canal, Eva, Trixie said, her warm rasp dropping an octave. Leo's people have frozen the physical vaults at the Canal Street Bank, but they don't have the routing codes for the offshore assets in Grand Cayman. They're running blind in the dark. Evangeline closed the ledger with a quiet, decisive thud that sounded like a vault door locking shut. Then we let them think they've trapped a bird, Trixie. It's time to turn the cage into a slaughterhouse. Grady, Evangeline called out into the shadows of the shack. The massive bulk of Grady Miller shifted from the corner, his heavy gold rings glinting in the amber lamplight as he unclipped a tactical map from his leather case. The boat captains are loyal to the checkbook, boss, Grady growled, his low voice vibrating through the old floorboards. But they need to know the money is secure before they block the shipping lanes. If Leo's precinct boys intercept the Venezuelan freighter at the docks, the crew will scatter. Evangeline rose to her full 6-foot height, her emerald green silk gown, torn at the hem and caked with the dark mud of the marsh, clinging to her frame like a warrior's standard. The money doesn't exist in a vault, Grady. It exists in my mind. You tell the captains that if a single crate of Leo's cargo clears the harbor master's desk without my signature, I will delete every routing number in the St. James Trust ledger. I will leave them penniless in a city that already hates them. Silas St. James sat on a wooden bait crate, his large hands clamped around his King James Bible so tightly the leather spine creaked under the structural pressure. He looked up at his daughter, his cold, authoritarian eyes now clouded with a deep, systemic bewilderment. "You're talking like a warlord, Marcus, Evangeline," Silas choked out, his voice cracking as he stumbled over her true name. "This is a kingdom of sin you've built out of Julian Vane's blood money. It won't stand against the law." "The law in this city is a uniform holding an automatic rifle, Papa," Evangeline said, looking down at him with a calm, terrifying clarity. "You spent 20 years preaching about an abstract hell from your pulpit, but you never noticed the real one Leo Moretti was building under your porch. You didn't save me from the storm tonight because of the gospel. You saved me because you finally realized that without my gold, your church is just an empty room on a plot of mud. Back in the city, the air inside Representative Thomas Vance's private office at the state legislature smelled of lemon oil, heavy bond paper, and cold panic. Evangeline's black sedan was parked across the street, its engine idling as Trixie stepped through the door, wearing an elegant, tailored black suit that perfectly soft-contoured her silhouette. She placed a single manila envelope flat against the politician's mahogany desk. "That's a complete rooting history of your accounts in Grand Cayman, Thomas," Trixie said, her brassy rasp smooth and venomous. "The specific dates, the specific amounts, and the signatures from Julian Vane's real estate trust that funded your last campaign. The anti-vice budget bill targeting our clubs in the quarter dies in committee tomorrow morning. If it doesn't, the Times-Picayune gets a front-page layout on the righteous defender of the family." Representative Vance went completely pale, his hands trembling as he stared at the papers. "This is blackmail. This is a federal crime." Trixie leaned down, her dark eyes flashing beneath her lacquered hair. "In this city, honey, it's called continuity. Decide now. Are you a statesman or a prisoner?" The low, rhythmic thrum of an airboat engine cut through the silence of the bayou, echoing off the cypress roots like distant thunder. Leo Moretti stepped onto the wooden pier of the Stilt shack, his weapon raised, his enforcers fanning out into a loose tactical formation across the rotten planks. The screen door hung loosely on its hinges, swaying with a gentle creak in the humid wind. "Ava!" Leo shouted into the dark interior, his voice sharp and calculating. "The game is over. Your father's church is surrounded by Vance's precinct boys, and your mother is sitting in the back of a patrol car. Give me the ledger keys and I'll let the old folks live to see Sunday morning." He kicked the door open, his weapon ready. The room was empty. Sitting on the center of the bait table, illuminated by a single burning candle, was a small, hand-carved wooden compass, the exact token Marcus Thorne had given to his past lover years ago, left behind like a structural target. Before Leo could process the variable, a powerful, rich contralto voice boomed out from the surrounding dark of the swamp, amplified by a marine megaphone hidden in the cypress canopy. "You're looking at the wrong blueprint, Leo," Evangeline's voice echoed, sounding entirely unbothered by the wolves at her gate. "You thought the St. James Trust was a collection of buildings you could seize with an NOPD badge. But an empire isn't made of stone, honey. It's made of the lines between the people who hold the power. And your lines just broke." A sudden, sharp mechanical whine filled the air as Grady Miller activated a hidden generator, flooding the entire wooden pier with a battery of high-intensity marine spotlights that completely blinded Leo's enforcers. The dark of the bayou exploded into a strobe-lit nightmare of automatic gunfire and white smoke. Blinded by the spotlights, Leo's precinct boys fired erratically into the cypress trees, their lead shredding the hanging Spanish moss but hitting nothing but wood. From the marsh grass, Grady's boat runners returned fire with a clinical, disciplined precision, their hunting rifles dropping the enforcers one by one into the black water. "Fall back to the flatboats!" Captain Vance screamed, his uniform jacket stained with mud as his revolver cylinder clicked empty. He lunged backward off the pier, his boots splashing heavily into the marsh as his enforcers scattered into the swamp like frightened dogs. Leo Moretti sprinted down the narrow wooden gangway, his breath ragged and mechanical as he reached for the starter cord of his airboat. Before his hand could connect with the engine frame, a long, slender mahogany arm shot out from behind a cypress trunk, her fingers locking around his wrist with a terrifying physical framework of absolute strength. Evangeline stepped into the spotlight, her emerald green silk gown tearing further against the rough bark as she twisted his arm backward until his automatic pistol clattered into the black mud below. "The docks are quiet tonight, Leo," she whispered into his ear, her rich voice dropping into that terrifyingly smooth velvet tone. "Too quiet. Care to tell me why you're running without my manifest?" While the Marsh war raged, the scene cuts sharply to a parallel structural strike inside the Federal Family Court building on Loyal Street. Sloane Kensington, wearing a pristine navy suit, stood before a senior federal judge, flanked by Aunt Viv in a gold gown. She slammed a thick plastic evidence bag flat against the judge's desk, containing the wiretap transcripts and bank transfer mandates Trixie had extracted from Representative Vance's files. "This is the structural proof of a coordinated conspiracy, Your Honor," Sloane announced, her voice slicing through the sterile courtroom like a scalpel. "Captain Raymond Vance used falsified vice warrants to seize civil assets belonging to the St. James Trust to cover up a 15% embezzlement scheme orchestrated by Leo Moretti. We demand an immediate emergency injunction freezing every NOPD bank account in the 8th Precinct." The judge looked at the records, his brow furrowing as the legal trap snapped shut around the corrupt precinct captains. Back at the Industrial Canal warehouse, the remaining lieutenants, boat captains, and street-level runners of the Vane cartel stood in a loose, tense circle around the central loading bay. The air smelled of sulfur, fuel, and approaching rain. The heavy rolling iron door of the warehouse rose with a screaming mechanical whine, letting in the gray light of dawn. Evangeline walked into the room, her stride slow, confident, and entirely unbothered by the weapons pointed in her direction. She was still wearing the ruined emerald silk dress, her face caked with swamp mud and soot, but her head carried the invisible weight of a crown. Behind her walked Grady, dragging a bound, bleeding Leo Moretti by his starched linen collar. "Leo told you I was destroying Julian's legacy," Evangeline announced to the assembled crew, her booming contralto voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "He told you I was wasting your profit margins on legal defense funds for drag queens, but he failed to mention that he was preparing to liquidate the Grand Cayman accounts and leave every single one of you to face the grand jury while he hopped a flight to Caracas." Grady stepped forward, unzipping a leather duffel bag and dumping hundreds of ledger sheets, offshore bank statements, and wiretap recordings across the concrete floor. The lieutenants crowded around the papers, their expressions turning from suspicion to absolute fury as they recognized Leo's signature on the liquidation mandates. Leo Moretti swayed on his knees in the center of the warehouse floor, his face pale, his calculating eyes looking around the circle of his former men, finding only a vast wall of cold, unyielding hatred. He looked up at Evangeline, his jaw trembling. "Grady?" Leo stammered, looking for a mercenary compromise. "Grady, listen to me. I can double whatever percentage she's giving you from the trust vaults." "Grady doesn't take checks from traitors, Leo," Evangeline interrupted quietly, her deep-set dark eyes completely unblinking. "He knows that in this house, loyalty is the only currency that doesn't devalue. Grady, close the ledger." Grady didn't hesitate. with a mechanical speed that belied his massive size. He drew his weapon and fired 2 shots into Leo's chest. The sound echoed like thunder against the corrugated steel, followed by the heavy, wet thud of Leo's body hitting the concrete boards. Evangeline didn't look down at the blood spreading across the concrete. She stepped forward, her bare feet tracking through the edge of the puddle as she faced the remaining lieutenants. "The St. James Trust is still open for business," she said, her voice dropping into that smooth, terrifyingly rich velvet tone. "Your distribution percentages increased by 5% across the board starting this morning. The NOPD grand jury investigation has been neutralized by Sloan's injunction. If anyone else in this crew feels the urge to rewrite Julian's legacy, speak now." The warehouse was dead silent. One by one, the hardened dock managers and boat captains bowed their heads in begrudging, absolute respect. The new queen had taken her throne. 2 weeks later, the air inside the Rampart Street shotgun house had returned to its natural rhythm. The scent of sweet shea butter and boiling red beans filled the kitchen once more. Evangeline stood in front of her vanity mirror, her transition now progressing with a delicate grace under the care of Dr. Charles. The bruises from Silas's belt had faded, completely replaced by the smooth, polished mahogany sheen of her skin. Trixie walked into the room, her canary yellow gown gleaming as she placed a brand new, unwrapped bolt of emerald green silk fabric on the table. "The velvet room is packed to the sidewalk for the reopening tonight, baby. It's time to show them what a real coronation looks like." The door to the morning room opened softly, and Silas St. James stepped into the light. He looked smaller now, his large shoulders curved under the weight of his undone pride. He wasn't holding his Bible. He placed a small wicker basket covered in a gingham cloth on the wooden table. Inside was a stack of fresh peach hand pies, the exact ones he used to give Marcus before the lipstick and the silk scarves changed everything. "Your mother made these for you, Evangeline," Silas said, his voice dropping into a low, trembling whisper as he forced her true name past his lips. "She's waiting in the car. She bought a ticket for the front row at the Velvet Room tonight." Evangeline looked at the pies, a sudden wave of ancestral emotion threatening to break through her steely resolve. She took a bite. It tasted of her childhood, before the blood and the mud. "Tell her I'll be looking for her in the light, Silas." The basement of the Velvet Room was a packed sanctuary of pure, unadulterated joy. The jazz band was playing a slow, sultry blues rhythm, the brass instruments groaning with a majestic, melancholic power that echoed out of the basement and into the dark streets of the French Quarter. The air was a thick cloud of perfume, jasmine, and freedom. At a VIP table near the back sat Grady Miller, his massive arms crossed over his chest, his watchful dark eyes scanning the room to ensure absolute structural safety. Next to him was a reserved, empty chair containing a single white orchid, a silent tribute to Julian Vane. "Time's up, Eva. Give them their queen," Trixie whispered from the wings, her eyes shining with tears of absolute victory as she pulled back the heavy velvet drapes. Evangeline stepped out onto the stage. She was wearing a breathtaking new gown constructed from the emerald green silk, her tall, magnificent 6-foot silhouette completely commanding the space. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar, cheering, stomping their feet, and calling her name. In the front row sat Martha St. James, her tight bun loose, tears tracking down her smooth, dark brown skin as she clutched her apron, her eyes wide with a mother's true, unvarnished pride. Evangeline reached out, her long, slender mahogany fingers gripping the silver microphone stand with an unyielding, regal strength. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the humid, smoky air, and began to sing. Her voice, that rich, unforgettable, show-stopping contralto, vibrated through the marrow of everyone in the room. She didn't sing of the storm tonight. She sang an anthem of deliverance, of power, of authentic identity, and of a woman who had broken through the right angles of her past to claim her true crown. The 1980s in New Orleans were still dangerous, and the laws were still cruel, but the keys to the kingdom belonged to a black trans woman now. The final scene tracks the camera slowly pulling back from Evangeline's face as her final high note trails off into an epic applause. The screen splits into a high-contrast cinematic composition. On the left, Evangeline under the white spotlight, surrounded by her chosen family. On the right, the dark, empty porch of the Ninth Ward shotgun house, where a single yellow jasmine flower lies crushed in the mud beneath a locked oak door. The frame holds on her intense, triumphant, dark eyes for a final, breathless second before the entire screen drops to black with a loud, echo-delayed sound effect of a heavy vault door clicking shut.